They say the most dangerous sound in the world is the click of a gun jamming. They're wrong. The most dangerous sound is a child crying in a room full of men who haven't slept in 3 days. Adrian Volkov was the kind of man who could burn a city to the ground without blinking, but on a Tuesday night in Brooklyn, he was just a terrified father holding a screaming 4-year-old. He had the money, the power, and the guns, but he didn't have the one thing his son needed. Until a waitress with holes in her shoes walked right past his security team and did the unthinkable. She touched the Don's son. And what she said next didn't just save the night it started a war. The rain in New York City didn't wash away the grime. It just made it slicker. Inside Le Magnifique, an establishment that pretended to be French, but was owned by a distinctly Italian syndicate. The air was thick with the smell of truffle oil and fear. Louisa Jenkins adjusted her apron, wincing as the knot dug into her lower back. Her feet encased in cheap black flats that had lost their arch support 6 months ago, throbbed in time with the smooth jazz playing over the speakers. She checked her watch. 9:15 p.m. 3 hours to go. 3 hours until she could go home to her studio apartment in Queens, check the stack of medical bills for her father and try to sleep. Table 4 needs water. Now, Louisa. The manager, Mr. Henderson, hissed as he walked by. He was a small man who wore suits that were too shiny and treated the waitstaff like indentured servants. On it, Louisa whispered. She grabbed a crystal pitcher, the condensation cooling her palm. As she turned, the heavy oak doors at the front of the restaurant swung open. Usually the host would greet guests. Tonight the host stepped back so quickly he nearly knocked over a podium. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. 6 men walked in. They wore bespoke suits that cost more than Louisa would make in a decade. They moved with a predatory grace, scanning the room not for tables, but for threats. In the center of the phalanx walked a man who looked like he had been carved out of granite. Adrian Volkov. Even Louisa, who tried to keep her head down and ignore the city's dark underbelly, knew the face. The tabloids called him a shipping magnate. The streets called him the Butcher of Brooklyn. He was tall, with hair black as a raven's wing and eyes that looked like shattered ice. But tonight, the terrifying aura of the Don was disrupted by the bundle in his arms. A small boy, no older than 4, was thrashing against Adrian's chest, screaming with a lung capacity that rattled the wine glasses. "Make it stop," a woman at table 2 whispered to her husband. Her husband kicked her shin under the table, his face draining of color. "You didn't complain when Adrian Volkov walked in. You prayed he didn't look at you." Adrian looked exhausted. Dark circles bruised the skin under his eyes. He motioned to the corner booth, the most secluded spot in the house. His men formed a human wall around it. Louisa froze. That was her section. "Louisa!" Mr. Henderson was suddenly at her elbow, sweating profusely. "Go, take their order. Do not look him in the eye. Do not speak unless spoken to. And for the love of God, don't spill anything." Louisa swallowed hard. She gripped the pitcher and walked toward the corner booth. The sound of the child screaming grew louder with every step. It wasn't a bratty scream. It was a scream of pure, unadulterated distress. She slipped through the gap between 2 hulking bodyguards. One of them, a man with a jagged scar running down his neck, shifted his hand toward his jacket pocket. Louisa ignored him. At the table, Adrian was trying to bounce the boy on his knee. "Noah, enough," Adrian said, his voice a low rumble. "Please, just eat something." The boy, Noah, arched his back, his face red and wet with tears. He slapped away the breadstick Adrian offered. "No, no, I want. The boy dissolved into unintelligible sobbing. Adrian slammed his hand on the table. The cutlery jumped. The entire restaurant went silent. "I said enough," Adrian roared. The boy didn't stop. He screamed louder, terrified by his father's anger. Louisa saw Adrian's hand tremble. It wasn't rage, she realized with a jolt. It was helplessness. This was a man who could command armies, but he couldn't soothe his own child. Without thinking, without remembering Mr. Henderson's warning, Louisa stepped forward. She didn't ask for a drink order. She set the water pitcher down on a side table and walked right up to the Don. "Give him to me," she said. The silence in the restaurant was absolute. The bodyguard with the scar lunged forward, grabbing Louisa's arm. "Back off, lady." Adrian looked up. His ice-blue eyes locked onto Louisa's brown ones. For a second, she thought he was going to order her execution right there between the appetizer and the entree. "Let her go," Adrian said softly. The bodyguard released her. "He's overtired," Louisa said, her voice shaking but her hands steady. "And he can feel your stress. You're holding him like a football, not a child." Adrian stared at her, stunned by her audacity. "He hasn't stopped crying for 6 hours. The nannies. He screams at them." "Because they aren't family," Louisa said. She held out her arms. "May I?" It was a gamble, a massive one. But Louisa saw the desperation in the man's eyes. Adrian hesitated, then awkwardly passed the thrashing boy to her. As soon as Noah was in her arms, Louisa didn't bounce him. She didn't shush him. She pulled him tight against her chest, tucking his head under her chin so he could hear her heart beat. She began to sway a slow, rhythmic motion, and she hummed a low, vibrating note deep in her throat. "It's okay," she whispered into the boy's soft hair. "I've got you. Just breathe." Noah struggled for a second, then froze. The smell of her cheap vanilla soap and rain was different from the expensive perfumes of the nannies. The way she held him was firm, secure. The screaming dialed down to a whimper, then a hiccup, then silence. Noah's small hand balled into the fabric of Louisa's uniform. His breathing hitched, then evened out. Within 2 minutes, his heavy eyelids drooped. The entire restaurant was watching. Mr. Henderson looked like he was about to faint. Adrian Volkov sat back in the leather booth, his mouth slightly open. He looked from his sleeping son to the waitress in the stained apron. "How?" Adrian asked, his voice rough. "I have hired the best specialists in the city. How did you do that?" Louisa looked down at the sleeping boy. He had his father's dark lashes. She felt a pang of sadness for the child. "He wasn't hungry, sir," Louisa said softly, looking Adrian dead in the eye. "And he didn't need a specialist. He just needs a mum." The words hung in the air like smoke. Adrian flinched, as if she'd slapped him. The grief that flashed across his face was so raw, it was almost hard to look at. Everyone in New York knew the story Adrian's wife Isabella had died in a car bombing meant for him 6 months ago. Since then, the Volkov heir had been inconsolable. "A mum," Adrian repeated the words, tasting like ash in his mouth. "He needs softness," Louisa clarified, realizing she might have overstepped. "You're very hard, Mr. Volkov. He feels that." She gently transferred the sleeping boy back to Adrian. This time, Adrian held him differently, softer, supporting the head, mindful of the fragility. "What is your name?" Adrian asked. Louisa Jenkins." Adrian nodded slowly. He reached into his jacket pocket, pulled out a money clip, and peeled off a stack of $100 bills. He didn't count them. He just placed the thick wad on the table. "Thank you, Louisa Jenkins." Louisa stared at the money. It was more than she made in 3 months. "I can't take that." "Take it," Adrian commanded, the steel returning to his voice, "or I'll be offended." Louisa took the money. Adrian stood up, signaling his men. They moved instantly. As he walked out, carrying his sleeping son, he paused at the door and looked back at her one last time. It was a look of calculation, a look of possession. Louisa shivered. She didn't know it yet, but her life as a waitress was over. The fallout was immediate. "You spoke to him," Mr. Henderson screeched the moment the door clicked shut. "You touched the Volkov heir. Are you insane? If you had dropped that kid, we'd all be at the bottom of the Hudson River." "He stopped crying," Louisa said, stuffing the cash into her pocket. She felt sick. The adrenaline was fading, leaving her knees weak. "Go home." Henderson waved a hand dismissively. "You're done for the night. You're lucky he didn't shoot you." Louisa walked out into the rain. She clutched her coat tighter. She took the subway back to Queens, constantly looking over her shoulder. The memory of Adrian Volkov's eyes, intense, probing, burned in her mind. When she got to her apartment, she threw the cash on the chipped laminate table. $2,000. It would cover her dad's insulin for 2 months and pay off the back rent. She collapsed onto her bed, staring at the water stain on the ceiling. "He just needs a mom." Why did she say that? It was the truth, but it was a dangerous truth. The next morning, Louisa was awoken by a pounding on her door. She shot up, heart hammering. Had the landlord finally had enough? She opened the door to find 2 men in suits blocking the hallway. One was the man with the scar from the restaurant. "Ms. Jenkins," the scarred man said. It wasn't a question. "Mr. Volkov requires your presence." I have a shift at the diner in an hour," Louisa stammered. "Your shifts have been covered, indefinitely." Panic rose in her throat. "Am I in trouble? Look, I didn't mean to disrespect him last night. Mr. Volkov does not like to wait." Louisa realized she had no choice. She threw on a pair of jeans and a sweater, grabbed her purse, and followed them down the stairs. A sleek black SUV was idling at the curb. The neighbors were peeking out from behind their curtains. The drive was silent. They crossed the bridge, heading out of the city, toward the wealthy estates of Long Island. They pulled up to a massive iron gate, adorned with a V. The driveway was a mile long, winding through manicured gardens that looked beautiful but cold. The mansion was a fortress. Cameras on every corner. Armed guards patrolling the perimeter. They led her into a library that smelled of old paper and brandy. Adrian Volkov was standing by the window looking out at the grey sky. He wore a white dress shirt, sleeves rolled up, revealing forearms corded with muscle and ink. "Louisa," he said, turning around. He didn't smile. "Mr. Volkov." "Sit." She sat on the edge of a leather wingback chair. "I looked into you, Louisa Jenkins," he said, walking to his desk and picking up a file. 24 years old. Dropped out of nursing school 2 years ago when your father, Thomas Jenkins, suffered a stroke. You work 2 jobs. You are currently 3 months behind on rent, and your father requires a surgery that insurance refuses to cover. Cost $40,000. Louisa felt violated. You have no right to investigate me. I have every right to know who touches my son, Adrian countered calmly. He tossed the file onto the desk. You were right last night. Noah needs a mother. The nannies I hire last a week. They are afraid of him. Or rather, they are afraid of me, and Noah senses it. I'm not a nanny, Louisa said. No, you are a natural, Adrian said. He leaned against the desk, crossing his arms. I have a proposition for you. I'm listening. I want to hire you. Live-in care for Noah. You will handle his meals, his schedule, his emotional well-being. In exchange, I will pay you $10,000 a month. I will also pay for your father's surgery and move him to a private care facility where he will receive the best treatment in the state. Louisa's breath hitched. It was a lifeline, a miracle. But she looked at the man offering it. He was dangerous. He was a criminal. There's a catch, she said. There's always a catch. Adrian's eyes darkened. The catch is the world I live in. It is not safe. If you live here, you lose your privacy. You lose your freedom to come and go as you please without security, and you must never, ever speak to the police or outsiders about what you see in this house. And if I say no, then you go back to Queens, you get evicted next week, and your father waits another year for a surgery he might not survive. It wasn't a threat. It was a cold statement of fact. Louisa thought of her dad sitting in his wheelchair, trying to hide his pain. She thought of Noah, the little boy, screaming for comfort. I have one condition, Louisa said, surprised by her own bravery. Adrian raised an eyebrow. Oh, I am the nanny. Nothing else? I don't warm your bed. I don't run your drugs. I take care of the boy. A ghost of a smile touched Adrian's lips. It made him look younger, less terrifying. I don't need to pay women to warm my bed, Louisa. Agreed. Then I accept. Good. Adrian pushed a button on his desk. Pack your bags. You move in tonight. The Volkov estate was less of a home and more of a museum dedicated to silence. Louisa had been there for 3 weeks. Her room was luxurious, bigger than her entire apartment with a balcony overlooking the rose garden. Her father had been moved to St. Jude's private recovery center, and the doctors said he was already improving. But the house was suffocating. Noah was a sweet child, but he was deeply traumatized. He had night terrors. He refused to enter certain rooms, and he clung to Louisa like a lifeline. Louisa quickly learned the hierarchy of the house. There was Adrian the king. There was Luca the scarred bodyguard, who was actually the head of security. And there was Silas. Silas Volkov was Adrian's younger brother. Where Adrian was cold and controlled, Silas was chaotic and cruel. He had a smile that didn't reach his eyes. He often watched Louisa from across the room, licking his lips in a way that made her skin crawl. One afternoon, Louisa was in the kitchen trying to get Noah to eat a sandwich. Crust off? Louisa asked. Yes, please, Noah whispered. He was still quiet, but he wasn't screaming anymore. Well, the hired help playing house. Louisa turned. Silas was leaning against the doorframe, spinning a butterfly knife. Hello, Mr. Silas, Louisa said, keeping her voice neutral. She stepped between him and Noah. You know. Silas walked closer, the knife clicking rhythmically. My brother has a habit of collecting strays, but they usually don't last long. Isabella didn't last long. Don't talk about my mom, Noah shouted suddenly. Silas laughed. Your mum was weak, kid, just like your dad. Get out, Louisa said. Her voice was low but firm. Silas stopped spinning the knife. Excuse me. You are upsetting the child. Get out of the kitchen." Silas stepped into her personal space. He smelled of whiskey and gunpowder. "You forget your place, girl. You're just a paid servant. I could snap your neck and Adrian wouldn't blink." "Try it." The voice came from the doorway. Adrian was standing there, still wearing his coat, snow melting on the shoulders. He held a leather briefcase in one hand and a suppressed pistol in the other. He didn't point the gun at Silas, but the threat was clear. "I was just welcoming her to the family, brother." Silas sneered, backing away. "Stay away from her," Adrian said, "and stay away from my son. If I see you near them again, blood relation won't save you." Silas glared at Louisa, a look of pure venom before storming out. Adrian holstered the gun and sighed. He looked exhausted. He walked over to Noah, kissed the top of his head, and then looked at Louisa. "Are you okay?" he asked. "I'm fine," Louisa said, though her hands were trembling. He said things about Isabella." Adrian's face hardened. "Silas is a problem, one I am dealing with." He paused, looking at her. "You stood up to him. Most of my men are afraid to do that." "I was protecting Noah." "I know." Adrian took a step closer. The air between them charged with a sudden electric tension. For 3 weeks, they had been professional. But living in the same house, sharing meals, raising a child together, the lines were blurring. "You look tired, Adrian," Louisa said, slipping up and using his first name. He didn't correct her. "Business is difficult. The Grayson family is moving in on our territory. They think I am weak because I am mourning." "Are you?" "I was," Adrian admitted. He looked at her, his eyes traveling from her eyes to her lips. "But things are changing. The house feels different with you in it. Brighter." Louisa's heart hammered against her ribs. She knew she should step back. This was the boss, the danger. But she felt a magnetic pull toward his brokenness. "Adrian," she whispered. He reached out, his rough thumb grazing her cheekbone. "Louisa, you should be afraid of me." "I know, but you're not." "No." He leaned in. His breath ghosted against her lips. It was a moment of pure, suspended inevitability. Crash! The sound of shattering glass came from the front hallway. "Boss!" Luca's voice roared over the intercom. "We have a breach. Perimeter is compromised." Adrian's expression instantly shifted from lover to killer. He grabbed Louisa's arm hard. "Take Noah," he ordered, shoving them toward the back servants' stairs. "Go to the panic room in the basement. Do not come out until I come for you. Do you understand?" "Adrian, what's happening?" Louisa cried, scooping up a terrified Noah. "War," Adrian said, pulling his gun. "Now go!" Louisa ran. She clutched Noah to her chest as gunfire erupted in the grand foyer. She didn't know it then, but the breach wasn't just an attack from the outside. The doors had been opened from the inside. The betrayal had begun. The panic room was a cold steel box, hidden behind a false bookcase in the basement. It was stocked with water MREs and a bank of monitors displaying the chaos upstairs. Louisa huddled in the corner, clutching Noah. The boy was shaking his face, buried in her neck. On the screens, she watched flashes of gunfire. Men in black tactical gear were swarming the hallway. She saw Luca taking cover behind a marble pillar, firing an automatic weapon. But she didn't see Adrian. "Is Daddy okay?" Noah whispered. "Daddy is a superhero." Louisa lied, smoothing his hair. "He's just cleaning up the bad guys." Suddenly the keypad on the panic room door beeped. Louisa froze. Adrian had said only he and Luca knew the code. But if Adrian was coming, he would have announced himself over the internal comms. Beep, 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 click. The heavy hydraulic locks disengaged. The steel door hissed open. Louisa grabbed a heavy metal flashlight from the emergency kit standing in front of Noah. She expected the Grayson hitmen. Instead, Silas walked in. He was smiling, but it was a jagged, manic look. He held a pistol loosely in his right hand. "Smart girl," Silas drawled, stepping inside. "Hiding the air. Standard protocol." "Silas," Louisa breathed, lowering the flashlight slightly. "Thank God." Adrian said, "Adrian is busy dying upstairs." Silas interrupted his laugh, echoing in the small metal room. "My brother always was too sentimental. He let his guard down. He let you in." The realization hit Louisa like a physical blow. "You opened the doors." "I did," Silas admitted. "The Graysons made a better offer. Half the city and I don't have to play second fiddle to the butcher anymore." He raised the gun, pointing it directly at Noah. "Now hand over the kid. He's my ticket to legitimize the takeover." "No," Louisa said. She didn't shout. She stepped forward, shielding Noah completely with her body. "Move, Waitress," Silas snarled. "I'll shoot you through the stomach if I have to." "You won't shoot," Louisa said, her mind racing. She remembered the anatomy charts from nursing school. She remembered where the arteries were. "You need him alive. If you shoot, you might hit him. And if he dies, the Graysons have no use for you." Silas hesitated. For a split second, his eyes flickered to Noah. That was all Louisa needed. She didn't swing the flashlight like a club. She threw it with all her might, aiming not for his head, but for the hand holding the gun. The heavy maglite smashed into Silas's knuckles. He howled, the gun clattering to the metal floor. Louisa didn't wait. She launched herself at him. She wasn't a fighter, but she was a desperate woman protecting a child. She drove her shoulder into his stomach, knocking him back against the open steel door. Silas roared, grabbing her hair and throwing her to the ground. He scrambled for the gun. "Louisa!" Noah screamed. Silas's fingers brushed the weapon. Louisa kicked out her sneaker, connecting with his nose. Blood sprayed. Before Silas could recover, a shadow fell over the doorway. Bang! A single shot rang out. Silas froze, then collapsed sideways, clutching his leg. Adrian stood in the doorway. He was a mess, blood soaking through his white shirt, a cut above his eye, but his gun was steady. "I told you," Adrian rasped, stepping into the room and kicking the gun away from his brother. "Stay away from them." "You're dead, Adrian," Silas spat, writhing in pain. "The house is swarming with them. You can't get out." Adrian looked at Louisa. "Can you run?" Louisa scrambled up, grabbing Noah. "Yes." Adrian didn't look at his brother again. He simply hit the control panel, locking the panic room door from the outside, trapping Silas inside the steel box. "Let him rot," Adrian said grimly. "We need to move. Now." They escaped through an old Prohibition-era tunnel that led from the basement to the garage of a guest house on the edge of the estate. The main garage had been blown up. Adrian practically fell into the driver's seat of an old dusty sedan kept for emergencies. Louisa buckled Noah in the back and jumped into the passenger seat. As they peeled out onto the back roads, leaving the burning mansion behind, Louisa looked at Adrian. Ideally, the car should have been speeding, but Adrian's foot was slipping off the gas. Ideally, he should have been barking orders, but his breathing was shallow. "Adrian, pull over," Louisa said. "Can't," he gritted out. Not safe yet. You're bleeding out, Louisa said, pointing to the dark stain spreading across his abdomen. If you pass out doing 80 miles an hour, we all die. Pull over. Let me drive. Adrian looked at her. His vision was blurring. He nodded weakly and guided the car to the shoulder of the dark forest road. They switched places. Louisa had driven a beat-up Honda Civic her whole life. This heavy sedan felt like a tank. She drove for an hour, following Adrian's whispered directions to a safe house, a hunting cabin deep in the Catskills. When they arrived, it was nearly dawn. The cabin was cold and dusty. Louisa carried a sleeping Noah to the bedroom, then went back for Adrian. He had collapsed on the rug in the main room. "Okay, boss," Louisa whispered to herself. "Don't die on me." She raided the cabin's bathroom and found a first aid kit. It wasn't much, but it had antiseptic gauze and a needle and thread. She cut open Adrian's shirt. The bullet had passed through the fleshy part of his side, missing the vital organs, but he had lost a lot of blood. "This is going to hurt," Louisa warned him. Adrian's eyes fluttered open. He looked at the needle in her hand. "Do it." Louisa's hands, which had trembled when she served coffee to rude customers, were rock steady now. She cleaned the wound, ignoring the blood that stained her fingers. As she began to stitch him up, Adrian didn't scream. He just watched her face. "You're good at this," he murmured, his voice thick with pain. "I told you, nursing school dropout," she said, tying off the knot. "My dad, I used to have to dress his sores when the insurance wouldn't pay for a nurse. You learn to be gentle." Adrian reached out his hand, covering hers. His skin was burning hot. "You saved Noah. You fought Silas. I did what I had to do." "Why?" Adrian asked. "You could have run. You could have given him the boy and saved yourself." Louisa looked at him, her eyes fierce. "He's a child, Adrian. And he's yours." Adrian pulled her hand to his lips, kissing her knuckles. It was an intimate, vulnerable gesture that made Louisa's breath hitch. "I have nothing to offer you right now, Louisa," he whispered. "My house is gone. My men are scattered. I am a king without a kingdom." "You have Noah," Louisa said softly, brushing the hair from his sweaty forehead. "And you have me." Adrian closed his eyes, a look of peace settling over his sharp features. "That's enough. For now." He fell into a feverish sleep. Louisa didn't sleep. She sat in a chair by the door, Adrian's gun in her lap, watching the sun rise over the mountains. The waitress was gone. The survivor had taken her place. 3 days later, Adrian was standing. He was stiff and his face was pale, but the lethality had returned to his eyes. He had spent the time on a burner phone making calls. "Luca is alive," Adrian announced, hanging up the phone. He regrouped the loyal men. "They're ready." "What's the plan?" Louisa asked. She was making eggs on the rusty stove. It felt strangely domestic, despite the gun on the table next to the salt shaker. "The Graysons are hosting a victory dinner tonight," Adrian said, checking the magazine of his pistol. "At Le Magnifique." Louisa paused. "The restaurant where we met." "Yes. They want to mock me. They think I'm dead or running. They're taking over my territory, my city. And they're celebrating on my grave. So we go in guns blazing." "No." Adrian shook his head. "They'll have heavy security at the doors. If we attack from the front, it's a bloodbath. We need someone inside to disable the security grid and lock the side doors so they can't escape." "I can do it," Louisa said. Adrian turned to her sharply. "No." "I worked there for 3 years, Adrian," Louisa argued. "I know the service codes. I know the back entrance. I know the staff Mr. Henderson will still be there. If I walk in wearing my old uniform, nobody will look twice. I'm just Louisa the waitress. It's too dangerous. It's the only way, she countered. They're looking for a Mafia don. They aren't looking for the girl who refills the water glasses. Adrian stared at her for a long moment. He saw the resolve in her eyes. She wasn't asking for permission. She was stating a strategic fact. If anything happens to you, Adrian started his voice low. It won't, she said, because you'll be right behind me. That night, Le Magnifique was closed to the public. Inside, the Grayson family, led by the corpulent patriarch Arthur Grayson, was drinking champagne. Louisa Jenkins walked through the kitchen door. She wore her old stained uniform. She had her hair in a messy bun. "Louisa!" Mr. Henderson gasped, dropping a tray of hors d'oeuvres. "What are you doing here? You're supposed to be." "I need my last paycheck, Henderson," Louisa said loudly, playing the part of the desperate poor girl. "I'm broke. Get out before they see you," Henderson hissed. "Who is this?" Arthur Grayson boomed from the main table. Louisa froze. She turned to the dining room. 50 men turned to look at her. "Just a former employee, Mr. Grayson," Henderson squeaked. "She's leaving." "Wait." Grayson grinned grease on his chin. "Is that the nanny? The one who ran off with Volkov?" Louisa trembled, fake fear mixed with real adrenaline. He fired me," she stammered. "He left me on the side of the road. I just want my tips." The room erupted in laughter. Grayson pounded the table. "Volkov, the cheap bastard. Even in defeat, he's a miser. Come here, girl. Pour us some wine." Louisa walked forward, grabbing a bottle of red wine. As she moved around the table pouring, she slipped her hand into her apron pocket. She pressed the button on the small remote Luca had given her. Click. The electronic locks on the front and back doors engaged. The steel shutters on the windows began to descend. "What is that noise?" Grayson asked, looking around. "That," Louisa said, her voice dropping, the tremble becoming cold and hard, "is the sound of the cage closing." She smashed the wine bottle over Grayson's head. As the glass shattered, the kitchen doors burst open. Adrian Volkov walked in, flanked by Luca and 10 of his best men. He was dressed in a black suit, looking every inch the devil of Brooklyn. "Good evening, gentlemen," Adrian said calmly. "I believe you're sitting in my chair." The firefight lasted less than 2 minutes. With the Graysons trapped and panicked, and Adrian's men executing a precise pincer movement, it was a massacre. When the smoke cleared, Adrian stood over Arthur Grayson, who was cowering on the floor. "Please," Grayson begged, "we can make a deal." "I don't make deals with bacteria," Adrian said. He looked at Louisa. She was standing by the bar, unhurt, holding a tray like a shield. Adrian holstered his gun. He turned to Luca. "Clean this up." He walked over to Louisa, stepping over the debris. He didn't care about the bodies or the money or the territory. He grabbed her face in his hands and kissed her a fierce, claiming kiss right there in the middle of the carnage. "You're fired," he murmured against her lips. "What?" Louisa pulled back, breathless. "You're fired as the nanny," Adrian said, a smile finally reaching his eyes. "I have a new position for you." 6 months had passed since the night the floors of Le Magnifique were stained red with Grayson blood. In the timeline of the New York underworld, 6 months was an eternity. It was enough time for empires to crumble and new ones to rise. It was enough time for the Volkov estate to be rebuilt, not just as a fortress of stone and steel, but as a home. Winter had descended on Long Island. The grounds once scarred by tire tracks and bullet casings were now blanketed in pristine white snow. The iron gates stood tall, no longer just a barrier to keep the world out, but a frame for the power that resided within. Inside the master suite, the air was thick with the scent of lilies and hairspray. Louisa Jenkins stood before a floor-to-length gilded mirror. She didn't recognize the woman staring back. The Louisa of 6 months ago, the one with the scuffed black flats and the apron that smelled of stale coffee, was gone. In her place stood a woman draped in silk and lace. Her wedding dress was a masterpiece of design, a custom creation that had cost more than the building she used to live in. It was long-sleeved, high-necked lace that transitioned into a plunging back modest, yet dangerous. It fit her like a second skin. "You look like an angel, Louisa." Louisa turned. Her father, Thomas Jenkins, sat in a wheelchair by the door. But he looked different, too. His skin had color. The hollow grey look of sickness was gone, replaced by the glow of health that proper medical care and nutrition could provide. He was wearing a tuxedo, his white hair combed back neatly. "Dad," Louisa breathed, fighting back tears. "You're standing." Thomas gripped the armrests and slowly, with effort but without pain, pushed himself up. He stood on his own 2 feet, shaky, but proud. "I'm not rolling you down that aisle, sweetheart. I'm walking you." Louisa rushed over, hugging him carefully, so as not to wrinkle the silk. This was the part of the deal that mattered. Adrian had kept his word. He had saved her father's life, while she saved his son's soul. "Are you ready for this?" Thomas asked, looking her in the eye. "You know who these people are, Louisa. You know what he is." "I know," Louisa said, her voice steady. "He is a dangerous man, Dad. But he's not a monster. Not to us." A knock came at the door. It was Luca. The scarred head of security looked uncomfortable in a formal tuxedo, his hand still hovering near the bulge of his shoulder holster. "It's time, Miss Jenkins," Luca said. Then he corrected himself, a rare smile touching his lips. "Mrs. Volkov." The ceremony was held in the estate's private chapel, a Gothic stone structure that had survived the fire. It was packed. The pews were filled with the most dangerous people on the East Coast. Dons from New Jersey, cartel liaisons from the South, silent partners from the shipping unions. They weren't just guests. They were witnesses. They had come to see if the rumors were true, if the butcher of Brooklyn had really been tamed by a waitress. As the organ music swelled, a haunting, deep melody that vibrated in the chest, the heavy oak doors opened. When Louisa stepped into the aisle, the silence was absolute. She didn't look at the floor. She didn't look at the flowers. She looked straight ahead at the altar, where 2 figures waited. Adrian Volkov stood tall, encased in a black tuxedo that seemed to absorb the light. His face was unreadable to the crowd, stoic, cold, commanding. But Louisa saw the tension in his jaw, the way his hands were clenched at his sides. Standing next to him, holding the rings on a velvet pillow, was Noah. The little boy looked like a miniature version of his father dressed in a tiny tux. But unlike his father, Noah was beaming. He bounced on his heels, waving excitedly as he saw Louisa. Louisa walked. Every step was a declaration. She felt the eyes of 500 predators on her, analyzing her gait, her expression, looking for weakness. She gave them none. She walked with her chin up, a rhythm she had learned from balancing heavy trays in crowded rooms, converted now into a regal glide. When she reached the altar, Thomas placed her hand in Adrian's. Adrian's grip was warm, firm. Grounding. "You kept me waiting," he whispered, so only she could hear. "I had to make sure I was worth the wait," she whispered back. The priest began the ceremony, speaking of duty, loyalty, and eternity. But the real vows happened in the look passing between them. "I will kill for you," Adrian's eyes promised. "I will live for you." Louisa's eyes answered. When the time came for the rings, Noah stepped forward. He didn't just hand the pillow over. He tugged on Adrian's jacket. "Daddy, lift me up," Noah demanded. A ripple of uneasy laughter went through the crowd. "You didn't interrupt a Mafia wedding." But Adrian didn't hesitate. He bent down and scooped the 4-year-old into his arms. "I have the rings," Noah announced to the room. He handed a small gold band to Louisa. "This is for Daddy." Louisa took the ring, her hands trembling slightly as she slid it onto Adrian's finger. "And this is for Louisa." Noah handed the smaller diamond band to Adrian. As Adrian slid the ring onto Louisa's finger and sealing her fate to his, Noah wrapped his small arms around both of their necks, pulling them together. It was unscripted. It was messy. It was perfect. The priest cleared his throat. "I now pronounce you a family." Adrian kissed her. It wasn't the polite peck of a society wedding. It was a deep, searing kiss that claimed her soul. The applause that followed was thunderous, not out of politeness, but out of respect. The butcher had a queen, and she had brought an heir who was no longer broken. The reception was held in the grand ballroom. Crystal chandeliers the size of cars hung from the ceiling. Champagne flowed like water. But even in celebration there was business. This was a room of sharks, and Louisa was the new swimmer. She was standing by the dessert table, watching Noah play with a group of other children under the watchful eye of 4 armed guards, when a shadow fell over her. "Mrs. Volkov," a voice purred. It was oily, patronizing. Louisa turned to face a man she recognized from the briefing files Luca had made her study. Salvatore Moretti. He ran the gambling rings in Atlantic City. He was older, heavy-set, with eyes that undressed women and dismissed them in the same glance. "Mr. Moretti," Louisa said, picking up a glass of sparkling water. "Enjoying the evening?" "It's a lovely party," Moretti said, stepping too close. "Though I must admit I was surprised. Adrian usually has more refined tastes." The insult was subtle, wrapped in a compliment, but it was there. He was calling her common. Trash. "Is that so?" Louisa asked, her voice calm. "Yes." Moretti swirled his wine. "I heard you worked in service, Le Magnifique, wasn't it? I suppose it's convenient for Adrian. He doesn't need to hire catering staff when his wife can just clear the tables." He laughed at his own joke. A few of his sycophants nearby chuckled nervously. From across the room, Adrian froze. He had heard. He started to move his hand, going to his jacket. The music seemed to stop for him. He was ready to tear Moretti's throat out in the middle of his own wedding. But Louisa caught Adrian's eye. She gave a microscopic shake of her head. "No. Let me handle this." She turned back to Moretti, a smile playing on her lips. It wasn't a nice smile. It was the smile she used to give customers who tried to skip out on the bill. "You have a good memory, Mr. Moretti," Louisa said, her voice raising just enough to carry over the nearby conversations. "I did work at Le Magnifique. I learned a lot there. For example, I learned that the man who talks the loudest usually has the empty wallet. The chuckle around them died. Moretti's face flushed red. "Excuse me." "And I learned how to spot a fake," Louisa continued, stepping into his space. She reached out and flicked the lapel of his expensive-looking suit. "Like knowing the difference between real power and a man who is leveraged up to his eyeballs in debt to the Russian cartels because his casinos are hemorrhaging money." Moretti went pale. That was a secret, a dangerous one. "How did you—" "My husband shares his intelligence reports with me." Louisa lied smoothly. "Because in this house we are partners. So, Mr. Moretti, I suggest you enjoy the champagne. It's the real vintage, unlike your reputation." She stared him down. For 10 seconds, the Atlantic City boss tried to hold the gaze of the former waitress. He failed. He looked away, muttered a vague apology, and retreated into the crowd. Louisa turned to find Adrian standing right behind her. He wasn't angry anymore. He looked awestruck. "Remind me never to cross you," Adrian murmured, slipping his arm around her waist. "You handle the guns, Adrian," Louisa said, smoothing his lapel. "I'll handle the snobs." "I think," Adrian said, kissing her temple, "that was the moment you truly became a Volkov." The night wore on. The dancing started. But for Louisa, the adrenaline was fading, replaced by a bone-deep exhaustion. She looked over at the kids' table. Noah was gone. Panic, cold and sharp, spiked in her chest. She scanned the room. No Noah. The guards were there, but the boy was missing. "Adrian." She gripped his arm. "Noah." Adrian scanned the room instantly, his predatory instincts flaring. He signaled Luca. But before the lockdown order could be given, Louisa spotted something. The heavy velvet curtains near the balcony door were twitching. "Wait," Louisa said. "I think I know." She slipped away from the party, moving through the crowd, and stepped out onto the balcony. The cold air hit her face, refreshing after the stuffy ballroom. There, sitting on a stone bench overlooking the snowy garden, was Noah. He had his knees pulled up to his chest, shivering slightly in the cold air. Louisa took off the fur stole she was wearing and wrapped it around him. "Hey, little man," she whispered, sitting next to him. "It's freezing out here. Are you hiding?" Noah looked up. His big eyes were wet. "It's too loud in there. Everyone wants to touch me. Everyone keeps looking at us." Louisa nodded. She understood. "It is loud and scary." "I missed you," Noah said, his voice tiny. "You were talking to all the people." "Daddy was talking to all the people. I thought maybe you forgot." Louisa's heart broke. The trauma of his past, the neglect, the isolation was still there, buried deep. "Oh, Noah." Louisa pulled him into her lap, rocking him gently. The expensive wedding dress bunched up around them, but she didn't care. "Look at me." He looked at her. "I could never forget you," she said fiercely. "You are the reason I am here. You are the reason Daddy is happy again. We were talking to those people so that they know to leave us alone, so we can be a family. Promise?" "I cross my heart," Louisa said. She began to hum. It was the same low, vibrating hum she had used that first night in the restaurant. The melody of a simple lullaby, but in the cold night air, it sounded like a prayer. Noah's tension melted away. He leaned his head against her chest, listening to her heartbeat. "Sing the words," he whispered. Louisa sang softly, her voice carrying over the silent garden. "Twinkle, twinkle, little star, How I wonder what you are." Behind them, the balcony door opened. Adrian stepped out. He saw them, his wife and his son, huddled together against the cold, a circle of warmth in a frozen world. He walked over quietly. He didn't say a word. He just took off his tuxedo jacket and draped it over both of them. Then he sat on the bench, wrapping his large arms around the bundle of them. "Is everything okay?" Adrian asked softly. "Everything is perfect," Louisa said, leaning her head on Adrian's shoulder while holding Noah tight. "He was scared," Louisa explained. "I wasn't scared," Noah mumbled sleepily from the depths of the fur and jackets. "I just needed Mom." Adrian stiffened slightly, then relaxed. He looked at Louisa. The moonlight caught the diamonds in her hair, but her eyes were brighter. "I remember what you told me," Adrian said, his voice thick with emotion. "That night, you said he just needs a mom." "I remember." Louisa smiled. "You were wrong," Adrian said. Louisa frowned, looking up at him. "I was—" "Yes?" Adrian leaned down, brushing his lips against hers. "He didn't just need a mom. We needed a mom. You saved him, Louisa. But you saved me too. I was drowning, and you were the only one brave enough to swim out to get me." Tears pricked Louisa's eyes. "I didn't do it for the money, you know, or the house." "I know," Adrian said. "You did it for the lullaby." Noah shifted in his sleep, murmuring comfortably. "Let's go inside," Adrian said. "It's time to go home." "We are home," Louisa corrected him. Adrian smiled, a genuine, unguarded smile that transformed his face from the butcher of Brooklyn into a husband and a father. He stood up, lifting Noah effortlessly in one arm and extending his other hand to Louisa. She took it. Together, the king, the queen, and the prince walked back inside, leaving the cold and the darkness behind them forever. The war was over. The reign of the Volkov family had truly begun. And this time, it wasn't built on fear. It was built on the unbreakable bond of a waitress who dared to love a monster, and the monster who learned to love her back. Wow, talk about a glow-up. From a waitress with holes in her shoes to the queen of the New York underworld. Louisa proved that sometimes the strongest weapon isn't a gun, it's a mother's love. Adrian Volkov might run the streets, but we all know who really runs the Volkov house now.